it's time for Goth Girl Fall. And what better way to get into it than deep diving into the horrid novels of Northanger Abbey. Hello, my book host. Today I'm going to talk to you about the horrid novels of Northanger Abbey, because what better time to embrace the goth girl lifestyle, the Regency goth girl who spent her time reading horrible novels, being really into just like living out that dramatic life of running through castles and massive skirts and thinking that like there is a mystery or murder behind every corner. So yeah, that's what we're going to get into today, and I hope that if you watched my previous videos, I have many videos on, I think, Northanger Abbey and Gothic stuff. This is a fun foray as well. I know that I just did something on designing costumes for Northanger Abbey, so hopefully this makes you feel in the good old Gothic spirit. Starting off with, what are the horrid novels? They are the Gothic novels that are mentioned in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. The book has a ton of discussion around novels and specifically like what reading, like what certain books that you read say about you, and how maybe you can lose a little bit of a grasp on reality if you get too deep into fan fiction. I mean, Gothic. Overall, Northanger Abbey spends a lot of time trying to define these spaces of like being a fangirl of like certain books and like what that means for the novel, which is kind of a newer thing and still being kind of defined and worked out. I'm not going to get into all the history of novels and everything today. Specifically, Gothic novels were a subgenre that were very dramatic, these very long, poetical, romantic things that were often seen as silly by many. And I think that modern readers of fan fiction and romance and other things that women enjoy will see a lot of parallels, which is why I love to recommend Northanger Abbey as a first Austen, because I think there is actually a lot to be said for how the themes there are still current. Not only do we have discussion of, you know, what makes like real literature and like real reading, but you also have gatekeepers in the process. People trying to say, oh, that's not a real novel. We literally have Mr. Thorpe mansplain to Catherine something where he's like, no, I know who wrote the book, blah, blah, and it's like, no, she was correct. Stop talking, sir. But we also have moments where like the novels that people like say a lot about them. So like Mr. Thorpe really likes The Monk, and that's like if somebody today said, I really love Infinite Jest, like that would, you'd know, you would be aware. The horror novels are a real thing mentioned in the book, and the book as a whole refers to Gothic novels a ton. Talking about Northanger Abbey, we have to talk a little bit more, obviously, about the publication of this, which I think adds a little bit more interesting context to the whole discussion of the horror novels and novels as a whole. So originally, Jane Austen called this Susan. We can assume that Susan was the main character instead of Catherine. She does later change it to Catherine, but she works on this starting in the mid-1790s. As we know, if you're an Austen lover, an Austen aficionado, she does spend a lot of time revising her books. In spring of 1803, she actually sells Susan, which will become Northanger Abbey, to Crosby & Co. for £10. So this is before she's done anything else, like in terms of publishing. She sells this for £10, and there's even an advertisement for this. But it never gets published. And this is the sad fate of Northanger Abbey. Let us take a turn into my favorite part of this entire thing. So Jane Austen is mad. In fact, she is a mad woman. And this is not the only connection to Taylor Swift that I could make, but like, it is there, and we could talk about that for days. What I mean by mad woman is in 1809, Jane is mad. And I mean that literally. She uses a pseudonym that is M.A.D, Mrs. Ashton Dennis. She's upset that her book has not been published, that it still is languishing, and that she's pretty much just like, either publish this or give it back. The publisher is like, you know what, you can have it back. You can take it anywhere you want to, just give us those £10 back. Now, at that time, Jane Austen didn't have a ton of extra money, but she publishes novels. Pride and Prejudice says it's its ability among a few, and she gets pretty successful and has some money to actually pay back the publisher for her book. So sadly, she does not pay them back until 1816. In the thing that I read about this, it is implied that after the sale was finalized and given back, they told the publisher, I mean, by the way, this was the author of Pride and Prejudice. Oops. It's kind of entertaining to think that a publisher passed up a Jane Austen novel and literally sold it for £10, but here we are. Sadly, Northanger Abbey was not published until after Jane Austen's death in 1817. Even though it was published after her death, we do have a quick advertisement at the beginning. I don't know if all editions have it, but it's basically Jane Austen explaining, listen, this book I wrote a long time ago. This is decades old references at this point. They're pop culture references. They're decades old. I'm sorry. I was trying to make a statement on a thing. Here it is. So we do have a little thing of her kind of apologizing for that. It's not really her fault, publisher's fault. And also we have a beautiful novel that is just like rife with beautiful, silly things about the Gothic and like talking about, I mean, essentially being an early fangirl, right? So with a little bit of background on that, are the horrid novels real? Yes, actually they are. So I'm gonna go for some summaries of them later on, but there was actually probably a time in the early 20th century where people weren't sure if they were real because they were like a passing fad, right? Like this is like a blip of like flash fan fiction moment, right? Where sometimes things can get lost. So Gothic novels had this moment, no longer in fashion when she died. People did realize these were actually real, but for a time they probably couldn't find them. Probably thought they were just made up titles, but they're real. And I think that's kind of a beautiful, wonderful, silly thing. So in my description, I will have a link to a post that has summaries for all the books, but also links to buy them or to read them for free. A lot of them are public domain. Not all of them could I find the text in public domain, but they are all out of copyright, right? And I think it's interesting to read them. I think that specifically the kind of meta-ness of the book talking about novels and novel reading is really fun if you are a modern person who really loves fan fiction or other genres that people shit on. There is discussion of that, of like, you know, obviously like creepy dudes judging women, young women, for their tastes and things, and how even at that time Jane's like, that's f***ed up, right? Because it is f***ed up. And I think there's a lot of relatability to that today. There's also a minor connection to the Godey's video I did last summer on Victorian fashion magazines, Victorian magazines as a whole. The pre-Victorian magazines were doing the same thing that Austen is talking about in this, which they were spending a lot of time with taste making, which is just, I mean, a smoother way to say like being an asshole and trying to tell women what they can and can't do. So I don't think for many modern readers it will feel out of the ordinary to read about a time where specifically men in the patriarchy were finding ways to demean women and women's interests and things that women were eager about, excited about, happy about. I don't think anyone will be shocked by that. I think if anything, it is just a testament to how we can still see ourselves in these things and should continue to talk about them. And this is why I think Northanger Abbey is the better read for high school students or introductory to Austen than Pride and Prejudice, because Catherine Morland is like an original fangirl. She's an original goth fangirl. She's out here being judged for loving a thing, for loving a genre, openly, wholeheartedly. Yes, there's a little bit of like, girl, like, somebody didn't actually murder anybody, but like, totally relatable and lovable, right? We love her. We love her and we love that she learned a lesson, and that's totally an acceptable thing at like 16. Worrying about getting married to a man that you think is an asshole is not really. I mean, maybe we could save that for your 20s, you know? I'm just saying. Northanger Abbey in schools. Northanger Abbey in schools! Okay, so let's get into some summaries of the hard novels and also the novels that are mentioned or alluded to in Northanger Abbey. The Castle of Wolfenbach by Eliza Parsons. Creepy old castle, spoopy mysteries. A creeper uncle. Oh no! Matilda Weimer is a classic damsel in distress. And this book might leave you in distress while you follow her trying to figure out her family's past. Claremont by Regina Maria Roche. Madeline is our Gothic heroine and Claremont is her father. We have a stormy night, a countess, and an adventure to unfold. The Mysterious Warning by Eliza Parsons. Ghostly Warnings, Family Secrets, Inheritance Drama. If you haven't caught on yet, Gothic novels have themes. The Necromancer. Or The Tale of Black Forest by Lawrence Flammenberg, aka Carl Friedrich Callard. I don't know. Like its title says, this is indeed about necromancy in the Black Forest. Prepare yourselves for murder, death, and ghosts. The Orphan of the Rhine by Eleanor Smith. Julia de Rubin is an orphan being pushed into marriage, but everything kind of goes to shit. The Horrid Mysteries by Carl Gross. Secret societies with a side of world domination. This road trip turns into a horrid tale. The Midnight Bell, a German story founded on incidents in real life by Francis Latham. Alphonsus on a mission to restore his estate. There's family mystery again. An evil uncle again. And true love at risk. I think this might be the first true love one we've come across today, but there's more. The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Honestly, this is a ride of a novel. Prepare yourselves emotionally, physically, mentally. It's long. There is bizarre poetry everywhere. Did I mention it's long? It's also just like the epitome of the Gothic novel at that time, and if you do want to read one, this is not a bad one to read in terms of just understanding what the genre was like. Also by Anne Radcliffe, The Italian. This takes place in 18th century Naples. We get church and religious drama, assassins, convent, and a lot. A lot is also a theme of the Gothic. The Monk, a Roman. It's by Matthew Lewis. And I hate talking about this book because it's a hellscape. The only reason I have it here is because it is mentioned. It is mentioned by Mr. Thorpe. It's creepy and it's gross. And Mr. Thorpe is creepy and gross for loving that. And that is the lesson that you get from reading that book, which you shouldn't read. It is awful. It is god-awful. And I do not have a trigger warning list long enough for that specific book. Camilla by Frances Burney. Love. It's a story about hardships amongst a family, and this is pretty popular. Jane Austen, we know, was a fan of Frances Burney. And I will say too, at the end of this, like, Jane Austen actually read all the Gothic novels. Like, she didn't not read these. She actually did read them, and she actually enjoyed them in her own way. I don't think she, like, capital L, loved all of them, but she did enjoy them. But this brings me to an excellent point about trigger warnings for all these books. It should be pretty clear from the summaries that all of them are going to have themes of violence. There's murder in a lot of these, a lot of discussion around death. There's also going to be a lot of, like, melancholy and sadness. There's also going to be, like, a lot of parental and family abuse. Kidnappings are a big one. Tons of creepy relatives and men. The list goes on. I would say the worst that I've come across so far is The Monk. There are major themes of assault and rape and other terrible things. Just, I would steer clear of that one if I were you. And I guess this really does segue into, should you read the Gothic novels? Yes and no. So I've had a bunch of experiences reading these. I try to make it a tradition that every year I read a different one. When I ran a Jane Austen book club, when I've run actually many Jane Austen book clubs, our October assignment was that you would pick a horror novel and everyone could pick their own, because some people didn't want to ever reread them ever again. But I was like, pick a new one. If you haven't read them yet, pick something. And then we do like a book report back and talk about what we read. And that was always fun because then you learned a little bit more about each novel. You didn't have to reread the ones that you hated. And I think that reading at least one, you don't have to be me and try to read a new one every year, but I do think reading at least one really makes Northanger Abbey feels so different. I feel like I gain a better understanding, if that makes sense, of when we talk about specific novels and who likes a certain novel and we're talking about high drama, you understand the level of high drama that's happening in those books. You understand these ahistorical, weird things that are happening. You can understand why a young woman entrenched in these things might start to lose that kind of thread between what's on the page and what's off the page, if that's all she's staying up at night reading. So I invite you to join my Halloween tradition if you want and check out one of the horror novels. Again, I have linked to the books themselves. There are some free links. Some of them you would have to buy. Check your local library. They might have a copy. Do not read The Monk. Do not read, look at me and you right now. Promise me you're not gonna read The Monk. And promise me, if you have read The Monk, you're going to go to therapy. You're going to call your therapist right now when I'm done with this and say, we got to talk about some things, okay? Okay. So yeah, thank you for joining me for a fun little historical foray into Gothic and horror stuff. this 13 weeks of Halloween. I know this is kind of not really crafty, but I thought it would complement my kind of foray into Northanger stuff this season, if you will. Thank you again, patrons. You are the whole reason I can do this, the whole reason that I can make content like this, and also you help me go to fashion school. Thank you so much for joining me, and don't forget to make it so. We're talking about a mad woman, which also could be really discussed in tandem with I don't know what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna say something.